Welcome to the Dark Zone Adventure Racing Podcast. This is your host, Brian Gatens. That's right, your podcast player is not broken. No music, no intro, nothing. We're diving right into the podcast today. This is due to the fact that I am working remote. I am down at a little race in Florida called the Keys 100. Without access to my regular material. So thanks for being here. Today's guest is Stephan Muller, race director for the Adventure Racing World Series World Championship this October 2023. Stephan is an established racer himself, has a lot to say about the course and about training and about being an adventure racer, and this is a solid episode. Before we get into the episode, quick thanks to Enabled Tracking. Mark and his team over at Enabled Tracking do a great job serving all your race tracking needs, and they are this episode's sponsor. Thank you, Mark and Margot and family, for all that you do for racing. Because of you, we get to watch the dots. Find them at enabledtracking.com. That's enough out of me. Here's Stephan. Enjoy the episode. So welcome to the Dark Zone, an Adventure Racing Podcast. It's your host, Brian Gatens. Today we have the race director for the 2023 Adventure Racing World Championships, Stephan Muller, all the way from South Africa. We have good Wi-Fi. We're feeling good about the call right now. We had to reschedule due to some tooth issues with me, but in venture racing, right, Stephan, we have to sort of go with the flow and be flexible. So I appreciate your desire to find a new time for us to do this. Welcome to the Dark Zone. We're very excited that the World Championship is coming to South Africa. Tell us a bit about the race.
Yes, it's been a long time coming. It would be our 12th Expedition Africa. Our first one was in 2011. We've transversed all of Southern Africa, all our neighboring countries. We even went as far as Rodrigues, just off Mauritius. So it's our third time actually in our province, the Eastern Cape. I think the big difference between the little bit I've traveled overseas and privilege I had of attending other races is that our country with our 9 provinces is very varied. So we don't look. One province doesn't look like the other province. So you can come to South Africa multiple times and have very different sort of nature experiences. Yeah.
So this is your 12th expedition race. So you have a lot of experience putting races together. As you pointed out, South Africa is a very varied topography, geography. You get a lot of different parts of the country when you go around there. What is it about the Eastern Cape that really distinguishes that from the other parts of the country? Terrain-wise, weather-wise, things like that. What can racers expect when they make their way there?
Look, the Eastern Cape, obviously, it's obviously on the coast. If you look at the geography of Southern Africa, especially South Africa, sort of everything along the coast is although there is the big animals, it is not you can't say it's not their natural habitat. Obviously, they were there a long time ago, but your majority of your big game reserves are in the northern part of the country. So where it's a little bit dangerous. We have in the Eastern Cape, we have a lot of game reserves, but it is very controlled. So that is the one thing. And there's no malaria on the coast. Plus, because we're on the coast, we have that extra angle that we can add every different leg. We have a bit of different rocky coast, sand coast, where if you're in the middle of the country, you only really have bushveld. Yeah.
Gotcha. So bringing it to the Cape, bringing it on the water. You mentioned some of the things go in your favor, right? The fact that the malaria is not really present, the larger animals are to the north, you're on the water. And so clearly the racers over the course of the World Championship can expect a lot of different legs, a lot of different terrain. As you've begun to map out the race yourself, and it's always hard to talk about the race before it happens because race directors have to be thoughtful about releasing too much information. What are the stages that you're expecting racers to go through? Obviously, we'll have mountain biking, we'll have trekking, we'll have water. What other experiences can racers expect?
Yeah, look, our philosophy with expedition racing is obviously we more with traditional line racing, basically start and finish in different areas, and it's sort of always to create that expedition feel. And not really doing any loops. Well, we don't do any loops at all. Everything goes straight. So sometimes our logistical line is as long as our lines on the ground. So that puts a lot of pressure on us, but it's just our style that we've maintained over the last 12 years. And it's probably where we, originated from when we raced and that type of thing. In those eras, all your big races were like that. So that's sort of our style. I mean, there's no right and wrong in adventure racing, and obviously that gives to the uniqueness of the sport. That every area, every race director, you're going to find a different experience. I think that is the plus point of the sport. But the area where we are now, we are actually going quite far from the coast. So we obviously work in kilometers. Our furthest line away from the coast is nearly 300 to 400 kilometers away from the coast. So it's we move into an area which we call the Karoo. So the Karoo is like a sort of a semi-desert-y sort of area, quite flat with these long mountain ranges. I think that's quite unique. So it doesn't sound exciting as you talk about it, but when you look at it visually, especially from a photography point of view, and from a sunset point of view, from a starry night point of view, that huge vistas type of thing. So we're moving into that area, which we have actually never gone that far if we had a coastal race. So this race is a little bit more mountain bike heavy that we would normally do. If you compared against last year, where we were in Lesotho, which is the mountain kingdom, we were over 50% on foot. Where here we're nearly 65% on bike. So that's it. But it's because of the distances we cover. And then obviously the mountain biking becomes a little bit faster than normal because it's more sort of a flatter, sort of deserty area. Hard packed roads, that type of roads.
So it sounds like the racers that are coming, and we'll talk about numbers in a second in different countries, things like that, because the World Championship is obviously the World Championship and a lot of interest around it. It sounds like really early on when people begin to plan and train for the race, as you shared just now, a big, long, burly course, a lot of distance, a lot of time on your bike, a lot of those hard packed roads going from stage to stage to stage. And that's good for the racers to know in preparation, because it's always good to have a sense for what's laying down the road for them. And you mentioned the vistas, you mentioned the mountain ranges and the long distance away from the coast. So racers right now, I'm sure, are taking notes at home as we're listening to the podcast about how they have to prepare for the race. You mentioned that you've raced previously yourself, and race directors very often begin as racers themselves. After giving us a taste of the World Championship course, which you just did for us now, obviously your own experience as a racer has informed your course design. Tell us a bit about your racing experience. When did you get started?
Yes, basically where it all started. I was in a permanent force, in a defense force for quite a while, 6 or 7 years of my life, and in Southern Africa. And one of my friends who was with me in the army, he in 99, gives away our age a bit anyway. In 99, he actually contacted me. He said he's sending me something in the post, and it was a VHS cassette. I don't know if people know still what a VHS cassette is. And on that was Eco Challenge Borneo, Malaysia, promotional video. And he sent me that, and it was 99. So it was just pre-2000 when the IT boom hit the world. That IT year when he was also in that space. So their company listed it. There was a lot of extra funds available. And he said he's going to enter this race, and sort of he gathered a few of us that had some other experiences together in our previous lives. And that is where I started. My first adventure race in my life was Eco Challenge. I'd never done an adventure race.
So literally off the couch. Obviously you had military experience, but off the couch, first race was Eco Challenge. How'd that go for you?
Yeah. It was actually quite interesting. I think in those days we had 12 days to finish. I think there were like 80 something teams. And I think about 40 maybe finished. I think it took us about 10 days. I think the winners were in about 5 or 6 days or whatever. It took us about 10 days. And I think we came like 32nd or 34th. But we got all over the line. We finished the course. So that was quite an experience. And then when we came back, it's actually the same year I met Heidi. When we came back, our adventure racing in our country only started sort of in that 99, 2000. That was the first race ever in our country. And then basically, from then we raced. We raced, maybe between me and Heidi, we've done maybe 10, 15 expedition races until about
And for those at home right now who are wondering, the Heidi that Stephan is referring to is Heidi Muller, who's an adventure racer. Also, she's the CEO of the Adventure Racing World Series. And we'll talk about that dynamic in a little while, Stephan, about having your wife be the CEO and what that must be like for you. But you went from in the Defense Forces, you walked into Eco Challenge Borneo, raced that, and then your adventure racing career just took off from there. And you've never looked back?
Yes, yeah. At that stage, it was very healthy in our country, our adventure racing circuit. We had 2 or 3, 4 maybe good, big organizers. So there was every year at least 1 or 2 expedition races. We actually raced XPD in Australia. we had a bit of international. Look, our currency is not very strong, so obviously it's expensive for us to travel. So we had that opportunity, and yeah, we raced. And then when the babies came in 2010, 2011, we made the switch from all racing to organizing. Yeah.
So how did you find that? How did you find and a lot of racers go through that, right? People race when they have less life responsibilities. Life gets more challenging and they shift from a racing mindset to a directing or a volunteering mindset. How did you find that switch for yourself? And what about your racing experience informed your race directing experience? How did you make that transference?
I think the main thing is, it's obviously my viewpoint, but I mean, even now, I'm thinking of yesterday, me and Heidi were hiking the first leg of our race, which is only like it's a trek leg. So we probably did about 10 kilometers, and it's quite a section that we went from inland to the coast. And we had to walk up this dune to get to the coast. And then, and it's a little example, but I think the feeling of what you're experiencing, it's what you must try and feel, what the athlete's going to feel at that specific point. When is enough is enough? When is a beach hike that's going on for 50 Ks too much? Maybe you should stop at 10. When is a dam paddle, which is boring? Or you have to try and, you don't get it always right. And obviously there's different opinions about it. But I think the biggest carryover is that you must, while you are racing, you experience certain emotions in each leg and highs and lows. And when you're scouting, you try and envision what is the athlete going to feel at that stage. So when is a leg enough? When is a 100K hike too much or a trek too much? And it should have been 80 Ks. When is it you making up distance? And when is it still adventurous? But again, you just hope you're always right. But I think that's the main thing, the feeling.
Gotcha. And so obviously having done some big races yourself, and definitely want to get back into your racing stories and your racing success. But the point you're making there is that as someone who's done the racing himself, you have a ballpark idea. You have a sort of a guess in how much is too much. Because you're right. Because sometimes there are race directors and there's no perfect formula. But what I hear you're saying is that you go on gut feeling, you go on experience, and you go on what you believe the teams would enjoy on the course at that time. But what did you learn from races that went bad for you?
Like I don't really, I must say, there's obviously nights that you would like to forget because you couldn't find the checkpoint. And sometimes, in the earlier days, there were errors, from the races, from organizers' point of view, by placing checkpoints and that. But I mean, I would say I don't really have, I think that's the whole thing about adventure races and people who follow the sport. You have a short memory for the bad stuff. I think most people get to each leg, end of the race, and they would say never again. And that it's a fleeting moment. The search for something bigger and better, it's a thing. You can't describe it. Why do you keep on coming back? I mean, even organizing it doesn't, other than I would say our main motivation is the accomplishment of what we promised to. We promised a certain outcome for teams, and if we can accomplish that outcome, I think that is where the satisfaction comes from. You can't say it's financially or it's whatever. I mean, there's obviously everybody got their own motivation, but how do you describe it? It's why do you actually organize it? Why do you race it? Why do you follow it? It is something that's there. And I think once it captures you, you don't really have to describe it. It's just
it just is what it is, right? Yeah, it's one of these things. I think you're right about that. It's a sport and it's an experience. It's a community that is resistant to analysis, right? It's hard to define what it is and why people do it. And to that point, like the people that live in it, who hear the music of it and enjoy the adventure racing, they're into it. But it's tough to transfer that to other people. And the point that you made, and I laughed when you said it, was I know many a racer who 80% into a race, 75% into the race, when they're beat up and they're tired and their feet are hamburger and they're exhausted, they're never doing this again. And then they rally a bit and getting that checkpoint's a great feeling, right? It's a little shot of dopamine, makes you feel good. And you cross that finish line. And I know many a racer who on the drive home from the race was like, when's our next one? Like no matter how bad it was, how hard it was, there's something about it that touches them inside. And I want you to try to talk a bit more about that, because like I said, it's resistant to analysis, resistant to discussion. But time and time again, there are members of the adventure racing community that just keep throwing themselves at these big challenges. And you're going to have many teams coming in there in October of this year, taking part in your course, who are going through the time and the effort and the expense, and they're going through all of that to get to your race. Why do they do that? Because it's so hard to train, to plan, to get the gear, and to get there. Tell us why you think people keep coming back to the sport.
I think it's the allure of it. I mean, I've got actually a very good example that we have a team which been racing many years in our country, and I think the average age is around 70 to 72 years old. And they've been doing all our big races, and then they always, what they do, they look at the two transitions and they find the shortest route between the two transitions. Never mind
my heroes.
You know what I mean? And I mean, we had a big discussion of should they enter this race, because this race is not like that. So, like example, Lesotho, because it's all on tribal land. I mean, you know, you can do whatever you want between points. There's no permissions needed. You know, once you got the permission of the king, it's like a canvas. Where now we got to over a lot of private. I mean, a majority of our route is private land. So we have to get, and a lot of them are game farms. Although no serious, you know, dangerous game, it's still game farms. So you have to work out how the people are actually going to enter and exit these properties, you know, via gates and whatever the private, you know, so you can respect the private landowner. And actually, the point I'm trying to make is that for them, this route won't work out because it's pretty much a line race, and then the whole discussion is. You know, normally, okay, not working out for me, it will be too long for me, where they were trying, how can I actually make it for them possible? And I'll put it in my route planning, because they want to be at the start. They want to be at the finish. They want to be part of it. And I think that is it. It's this sort of adventure that you're going to do. Remember that, you know, it's also very different in our country because it's all on private land. You know, we're not going through nature reserve, but it's, you know, pretty much all over the world, probably the same thing is that. The feeling you want to create for the teams is what you are doing now, you can't do on your own. If you want to go plan this little adventure on your own, it's nearly impossible to do, you know, from a logistical point and whatever. So it's that sort of allure to this unknown thing, although you know the pain you're going to go in. I mean, it's only that top, 10, 15 teams that really can conquer a course and then walk off and look like they have done nothing. The rest of the people are paying every step of the way, so they come back for that.
And how many teams do you have coming to the World Championships? What's your current registration?
Look, our registration system is a little bit different maybe than other years, that we basically don't ask sort of any financial sort of, you know, payment in the beginning. People only started to pay now, so basically everybody can enter. So I think our biggest, I think we were over 150 teams that actually entered, and I think we're around about 100 and say maybe 55 or so that's still on the list. Most of the teams that's out is actually people who merge. I would say 90% is teams who got one or two members and they couldn't find somebody else and they looked on the list and they joined. Right. Most of the people actually coming still. So our plan was sort of between 100 and 150.
And the reason I asked that question is that to your point, there's only going to be so many teams on the podium at the end of the race, right? You have 150 teams starting. It's going to be a 3-team podium, maybe 5-team podium. So of the 150 teams, 145 of them are racing for the rest of those spots, and yet they still get out there, and yet they still get into the race. So many people go into endurance sports, and they go into the idea that they have to succeed in this very like binary sort of way. Adventure racing, we measure success with a different scale. We don't see it the same way as a lot of other sports do.
Yes, I think all teams will have a moment. So your winning team's moment will obviously be when they cross the finish line. Your top 3 or 4, 5 teams' moment will be when they stand on the podium. But the majority of the teams won't ever have those moments. The moment they will have is that after day 8, where they looked for 6-7 hours for the same checkpoint, and on top of this ridge and the sun comes up. That's their moment. And racing number 79, they've been toiling between them and team 80 for the last 5 days, in front and back. And when they cross the finish line, they're in 79th, and the team that they've been around so long for 5 days are now in 80th, and that is their moment. So they will have moments in that. I mean, we give the teams 9 days to finish, 9.5 days. So they're all going to have that moment where they're going to obviously have lots of bad moments too. But they're going to have that moment where they're going to see this is the reason.
Exactly. And I think that's an important thing as the Dark Zone talks about adventure racing, it talks about the sport itself. We always pound away at that idea that the way that we measure those experiences, like people go through that for that experience, right? And for everybody, it's different. Now, along the way, you have to hold it together, right? You got to take care of yourself, your body, your feet. You got to take care of your teammates. There's all these pieces that have to come together to have that experience. You have to earn that experience, right? What do you
Yeah.
see in your experience as a racer and as a race director? What advice do you have for a team? What do you say at the beginning of the race to a team when you're giving your pre-race talk and you want people to get ready for the race? Mentally speaking, where do you want their head to be?
Look, I think teams who we've been fortunate that in our country we get a lot of returning teams. Some of the teams have been 3 or 4 times to Expedition Africa. So those teams who have raced in our country and know our style, it obviously gives them a little bit of advantage. That it is big legs, long legs, not many control points. So our sort of balance between we got our 6 disciplines in our sport. We have, we got on foot, on bike, on boat. And then the other 3 disciplines, which is just as important, is basically the navigation and the teamwork. And then obviously, lastly, the transitions. So our sort of, how can you put it, sort of where we come from is that all those 6 legs, all those 6 disciplines should have an equal value. You shouldn't have a team that is a top navigator and then obviously have a huge advantage. You shouldn't have a team that's a top paddler have advantage. So everybody is, if you have a very good skill set in all those 6 disciplines, you should have, this would be the race for you. So it's not as, we've obviously in the last few years been very privileged traveling a bit of the ARWS Series circuit. And it's always interesting for me because obviously I've got my perception of what I see an ideal course or an ideal or range races or whatever. And then I go to a country, many with different styles and way of they place their points and how they put it all together. And then I would say, well, this is not the way we do it. And then, in my head, try and keep it just not like I try to keep it to myself, but then I would speak to all the racers. And luckily we know a lot of them. And it's always just interesting for me that there is no style. The athletes they just want to have the adventure. They want to have that, and that's what it always amazes me that the teams are so open and receptive to all these different organizers of all these different styles, and they just want to experience this adventure and the journey around this adventure. You definitely get some teams that come to the country, they land, they race, they go home, and then you get some teams who just embraces this whole lifestyle. They go a little bit earlier, they experience the country, the food, the culture. It's just interesting for me, and I think, it's such a privilege to have that ability to travel all over the world and race like this. It's a massive privilege. Yeah.
Well, it's funny you made me laugh because we're on the cusp of adventure race Croatia. Is starting on Monday morning, and friends of the podcast, Andre Anderson and Chip Dodd from Team Disability, who I know that they've been in Croatia for a few days, and it's like they're making a travelogue documentary. So you're right. You really absorb these races. And to your point, I remember one time we were racing down in Ecuador, and we were in the Patate, the central part of the country, and it was you're coming across Sunrise and Cotopaxi's in the distance, and you just look and you think to yourself like, you have to earn this view, you have to earn this experience. And if it wasn't for an adventure race, you wouldn't find yourself there at that time, at that moment to see that thing. So you're right. I did find it very interesting. You just talked about the idea of those 6 disciplines and the idea of the balance between them, right? That you don't want to favor anyone over the other. And I love the idea of the different race directors have styles. Coming back to Igor, with Adventure Race Croatia, Igor has a ton of checkpoints, and he has this fast, high transition race. A big different race style from what you're doing in Africa, but his style is just as valid, just as strong, the way that he puts his races together, and you have that big variety. So contrasting that kind of a race with the idea of the line race that you have, in your experience with ARWS and with traveling to other races, what has always appealed to you? What kind of racing have you always liked to do?
Look, my first love is orienteering. And I do as an individual sport, if I compare it to, marathon running or ultra marathon running, where I come from, or, Ironman, that type of events, orienteering is still, I still get the most satisfaction out of it, even if it's just a shorter course. But, it's very different in Africa. We have no-go zones. Our route as I can't even remember when I ever had a no-go zone. We can go anywhere. So, So it opens it up. Where if I had to race in Spain and that, and organize it there, or even France, if you look at those routes, they have so many areas where they're not allowed to go, or tar roads, or just first world sort of areas. So they have to put lots more checkpoints in to sort of force people into certain ways. But yeah, it's actually that's what I say. It's interesting to me. It doesn't affect the teams. The team just want to have a solid race where the organizer, whatever they promise, they deliver it, and and all the stuff that has to be right is right. There's no obvious errors and stuff, and I think then teams just embrace it. And so if I look at Paraguay, for example, where basically it's you had a long sort of line of cycling, and every now and again you have a loop in between. People loved it.
Right.
And it's like totally contrast of what we do. But that is the beauty of the sport. So, it's hard to say, I think it must match the area, obviously. I mean, in Lesotho, we had 500 kilometers. We had 25 checkpoints in 500 kilometers. Yeah, some checkpoints were like 30 kilometers from one checkpoint to another checkpoint, but they had all these hundreds of route choices. So I know an area that I'm busy actually finishing that on Monday. It's an area of cattle farming. So they got so many fences there. So I have to put checkpoints to sort of force people through the gate, because we just cannot climb over these fences, because some of the cattle in that area is very, very high value cattle, specific sort of type of cattle. So you have to really respect the landowners. And when we get to the next trek, I've got 80 kilometers of game farms where we only traverse through game farms. So they've got a few gates where they have to go through, because you can't climb over the fences and the big fences. But each game farm is 15, 20,000 hectares. So we're looking at 15 to 20 kilometers walking on one person's farm before we get to the next person's farm, where we got hundreds of tracks and and the animals and that. So yeah, it's very different. So I don't think any organizer basically before said, this is the way I'm doing it, doesn't matter where I'm going. And when we look at our race we had in 2019 Rodriguez, we had an 18-kilometer island from point to point, and we had a 400-kilometer race on it. Although there were lots of loops and stuff, it still worked well. We had 75 teams there. So I think you just basically fit it to the area, and then once whatever system you decide, it must work that way.
Living here in the East Coast of America with high urban sprawl and a lot of density, race directors very often have to do the loop. For example, the Endless Mountains last year, that Rootstock Racing put a great race on. They had a final, massive canoe to finish the race. There were 2 times on that paddle where you left the water, ditched your canoe, you went into the woods, you did a loop, an orienteering loop, got back on the boat, because we don't have that spread of land here, right? Every time you turn around, you bump into that. And the parts of the country here that have that wide open spread of land are very often hard to get to. And so as a result, we find with these races here, you kind of force people. And to your point about checkpoints, that very often race directors will use checkpoints to drive direction, that we want teams to go in a certain way. So therefore, they're going to force you to that sort of a checkpoint. And I really like the point you made about like Rodriguez, and the point you made about, we talk about Croatia, that the race director works with what they have. And I think about Patagonia, right? Those big Patagonia races, massive races, hundreds of miles, 10 checkpoints, 5 checkpoints, where you just have to figure your own way out along the way. Really, really something else that you see there. We're going to the Faroe Islands in August. Team Dark Zone is heading up there. And, the Faroes, for those who don't know, it's an island chain, if you will, it's part of Denmark, it's north of Scotland. And there's like 18 islands. And there's no doubt in our mind that the big trek they're going to have there is going to be a pack raft and between different islands, that you're going to carry your double pack raft and you're going to be in the open ocean getting in between. The race directors work with what they have, right? And clearly you get to build the kind of race that you're able to build up there in Africa. Gives you so many different options. So if someone's sitting home right now, and if they want to consider, first of all, could you still sign up for the race? Is it still open registration for the World Championships?
Yes, we close end of May, so we have another 2 or 3 weeks, and and there's probably about I think we are at about 95 confirmed now, and about another 30 or 40 that's on the list that's sort of still thinking or not thinking or whatever.
What's it like getting there logistically? Where do you fly into? How does it work? If a team wants to come, like, what do they have to think about? Because we all know that the hardest part of a race is getting to the race, right? Getting to the start is the hardest part. What does that look like in terms of transfers, flying in, accommodations? What's it like for the racer?
Now look, COVID obviously played a bit of havoc with general air travel, and the amount of airlines are still available. But your two main entries into South Africa from an international basis, basically either Cape Town on the coast or Johannesburg, which is inland, depending on where you're coming from. So from America and from North America, South America, there's probably Cape Town is more easier. In Joburg, if you go through one of the hubs in Dubai or Doha, one of those places. And then basically our coastal town closest to our resort is called Port Elizabeth, or it's got a new name now, Kaberga, which is a local name. And there was a little bit of a hiccup, because when we planned it 2-3 years ago, there was like 5 major airlines that flew from all those hubs. And at the moment, there's only like 3. So we lost 2 or 3 airlines there. So that does bring our, not our per people capacity down, but it brings our bike box capacity down.
Right.
Because all the planes book, they don't book equal seats to bike boxes. So that is a little bit of concern, but we can't really get a hang of it yet, because everybody hasn't bought look at these 6 months to go. Everybody hasn't bought their air ticket. So and then a lot of teams comes earlier. But I mean, and then basically that airport is an hour's drive away from our host resort, which is in Cape St. Francis. That resort is full now. They've reached their capacity. And so what their resort are doing now, it's a holiday town. So there's many houses around the resort, which they are busy now sort of sourcing for everybody. But most of the teams have booked their accommodation already. And then, the only other sort of thing that we will work on is that we are based in Johannesburg. My practice is in Johannesburg. So, and all our trucks and trailers are based there. So basically, we will then, if we find we have a problem, we'll do some land transport it's about 10-hour drive with our trucks and trailers to get bikes in and out. But it hasn't been, I'm sure it will happen, but we haven't got to that step yet, because the teams are still busy booking. And a lot of teams obviously are especially teams who want to do well, they understand the time zone issues. They are arriving much earlier. And then obviously the Eastern Cape, where we are, we within 30 minutes drive from any lion, elephant. You can go in on a public national game reserve, where you can drive your own car, or basically hop onto one of their cars. But there's a lot of private reserves. Obviously, it's a little bit out of our sort of budget for most South Africans, but for overseas people, that 5-star game experience or 7-star game experience, if you have the funds, I mean, it's such an experience to be taken basically to any animal within touching distance and be spoiled like that. But it is a costly affair, but you can do it for a day or two. So, and then that's just the game. I mean, on the garden route on the way to Cape Town, it's probably one of the most scenic. It's like your road between San Francisco and San Diego, LA, that sort of coastal trip. One of those, people from from abroad always like to, do a drive like that. So that's sort of that type of drive. So there's a lot of other stuff to do for teams who want to travel on, and the wine farms and all the normal stuff and so on. On the coast, it's all close, yeah.
And to your point, right? Like, a lot of racers, if they have the time and capacity, they wrap either side of the trip. They want to see what's there. And you've done a very nice job on your social media, done a nice job on your website, explaining that the World Championship is not in some remote area that's hard to get to and there's nothing to see. To your point, it's a resort town. It's a beautiful town. And if a team could work it out, you can come there, you can do the big race, and if on either side, spend some time there visiting the game farms and really absorbing up the South African cultural experience. And so I think that's a really nice opportunity for teams that want to get there, because to your credit, am I right that this is the first time the World Championships are being held in Africa?
First time,
right? So once again, too, a bit of a momentous occasion, right? The fact that the Worlds are coming there. I'm going to Paraguay next year, but definitely coming to you. Right now, if a team wants to consider coming out there, you mentioned the amount of biking they're doing, all of that. What other training do you find that best teams take part in? Do you as a racer yourself, what always served you the best when it came to your racing?
Well, let's start with the paddle, because the paddle is on a sort of grade 1, maybe 1.5 sort of rapid river. There's only one paddle, because the Eastern Cape at the moment, the last sort of 8 or 9 years, there's been quite a lot of drought. There's a few dams, there's a few coastal rivers, but the dams are not. We use it in our smaller races. It's not World Championship standard. Dropping the boat, doing a loop on the dam, getting checkpoints, coming back and going on. It's not our style. You can do it, but it's not our style, right, on this type of race. If it was a normal weekend race, to make it logistically easy for us, we'll do that. So the dams are not really that adventurous. And the coastal rivers, which is, although it's beautiful, it's on the maximum from anywhere on the beach, and the sea is out. In Africa, sea paddling, you wake up in the morning, you look at the sea and say, I'm paddling now. You don't plan you're going to paddle on Saturday. Yes, that we have, I think in 12 Expedition Africas, we had maybe 6 sea paddles planned, and we probably only did 2 of them. It's African sea is African sea.
It's tough, right? The weather, the wind, the water.
Yeah, it's just too dangerous. And, there's a couple of things lurking below also. But especially the area where we are now, because, the orcas is quite a phenomenon in South Africa, the killer whales. They've been actually, in my youth, there was no killer whales in Africa. In the last 6 years, they've been making an appearance on our southern coast. And they're basically chasing all the great whites up to the eastern coast.
So I just want to say that I think the racers probably appreciate the fact that you're not putting adventure racers do like danger, but great white sharks, good call on your part. We on behalf of the racing community, thank you for not doing that to us.
So the paddling is basically you have to paddle on moving water, 60, 70 Ks. That's probably the paddling leg. That's quite easy to train for. And remember, we supply the boat. So we use plastic sit-on tops, double boats. So it's sort of that style, not a pack raft. Pack raft, if I had to get people pack raft here on that leg, I would give 50% of the pack raft be still at the end of that leg will still be in one piece.
Gotcha.
It's just Africa. There's fawns, and if you're going to stay in the water, you're fine. But if you're going to touch any vegetation of your pack raft, it will be shredded. So pack rafts it's not a thing. I mean, there is certain areas which is a wonderful thing, but definitely not in the Eastern Cape. But we have the double seat. So people must just look on the website how those boats look, because they are a bit different from a paddling way, because they're a bit wider. So you have your paddling strokes a little bit different. So that sort of paddling. Then the rest of the training is the long legs. You have to be the long legs. A lot of sand. The job accomplished will be at the end of the race. I think we have how many? I think we have 10 legs in our race. Yeah, 10 legs, 8 significant legs. If the people can come off and say each 8 was a different experience, then I would say job accomplished from a route design. That you say, oh, so leg look like that leg, this look exactly. So it must be. The plan is to make every leg look and feel different than the previous one. And if we can get that right, then that is our sort of aim. So there is a lot of dunes, there's a lot of sand, there's a lot of and the brush are very on the brush is tough. So a lot of the hikes inland, you're not going to hike off route. You're going to stay on those game tracks. Jeep tracks, game tracks, because it's harsh vegetation. But in general, from a training point of view, long legs. You must sit on your bicycle for many hours. You must be on your feet for many hours. It's not really a wet race. So it's not that sort of wild coast. We have an area in our country called a wild coast, where you sort of every kilometer you submerge your feet in water. So it's not that. It's not a wet race. October, the weather will be also for the Northern European teams, which doesn't really like the hot weather. It is October. And remember, May is our month in Africa. We always have Expedition Africa now, exactly now, in this week or two. I think the memory actually just came up from Lesotho 12 months ago. We just came out of Lesotho. It's actually snowing again in Lesotho today. But in October, it's obviously a little bit hotter. So that is a thing that they have to get used to. And then just because it's World Champs, it has to, fit in with the calendar, So and windy, but we're going so far inland, so every area, because we cross 3 different mountain ranges from the coast. Every time you cross a mountain range with a valley, or not a valley, a very vast flat piece in between, you go into a different sort of climate zone. So that I think that's going to be quite interesting for the teams. It can be hot, and it can be very windy and cold on the coast. Yeah.
So definitely they're going to get every ounce of racing is going to happen along the way, right? It feels like big, long, burly stage. It's going to be hot. It's going to be dry. There's going to be a lot of up. There's going to be a lot of down. And with 90 plus teams out there, we always had the idea that we create these very, very short-lived, intense communities of people. 100 teams, hundreds of people on the course. You got to take care of them from start to finish. I'm assuming, will there be live tracking during the race?
Yeah, there's always live tracking. So we haven't really decided. So we actually started our first race in 2012. We had our first live tracking. And since then, we sort of always done it in-house. But we still have to decide exactly on it, because our system works on spot trackers, and we are, and now with the power issues in our country, we only can go satellite because obviously our cell phone network is a bit under pressure. We have also, for many reasons. But with satellite tracking works very well, but we don't have enough units for all the teams, so we can rent them out. So we're still sort of thinking of what sort of tracking system we're going to follow. But yeah, we always use it. It's a definite. There's no question about it.
I'm assuming that because it's World Championships that you're planning on having a rather robust media presence there for the purpose of describing the race to the rest of the world.
Yeah, look, with the World Champs, it adds a little bit of a difference. So normally if we have our Expedition Africa, I mean, everything is in-house. We make our own daily videos, we make our own, movie at the end, and the normal live, coverage and that type of stuff. But once you do a World Champs, obviously you get ARWS Series media team with it. So you double up on your media team. So the normal stuff, the live tracking will happen. We still have our daily clip every day. We have our contribution of all our photographers en route. We're still working on it, but we will have, like we did in Rodriguez, we'll have a live show every night where we can call in different parties all over the world looking at it. So that sort of thing, and then obviously because we have ARWS Series involved, we're obviously looking at all these regions. So we have a specific reporter for the North American ARWS series that only reports on their pages. Same with South America, the same with individual for Europe. So basically, for each of those regions, we have one person in charge of running all those accounts and feeding that, especially the different languages. Our main language is English, but we have to look after our Spanish market. We have to look after the European market. We have people from Endorphin Mag for the French market, and obviously we get Rob Howard from Sleep Monsters. So yeah, it's a large contingent to bring around, and again because of our distances that we travel. If I look at when we went to Paraguay, even when we went to Ozark now, the distance that you travel per day is measurable in a couple of 10, 20, 30 kilometers. Some of our transitions are 200 kilometers apart.
Right.
So you have to move that media crew over that thing. As when our winner comes in on Monday afternoon, our last team is 400 k's away from us.
Right. It's a long tail, the snake of the race, right?
The mountain ranges are not mountain ranges where you can walk over. It's big trips around. So I think that to create this type of massive line racing, obviously you put yourself under much more pressure,
right? Because
suddenly you sit with this massive logistical line. You don't, we move our bicycle boxes 4 times. So we move 600 bike boxes 4 times over a distance of 500 kilometers. So, it's multiple vehicles driving right through the night full time, We have a little bit, obviously, a bit more African rules, so we're not really applied to 8 hours. Our volunteers work 24/7. There's not one person in the vehicle. So there's a little bit lax on that sort of restriction that other countries don't have. So
as long as the gear gets where it's got to go, right? Because the worst feeling in the world as a race director is having an empty transition area, racers coming in, and the bike boxes aren't there. So you're right, you have to get the gear there. So by hook or by crook, you're going to get them there. I know that the dark zone will definitely be a presence somehow at the World Championships. We always enjoyed talking to the racers and to the race directors. It's a wonderful experience, and it's a culmination too for the entire season's worth of racing. Because if you look now, it's for posterity, it's now May of 2023, right? And if you look at your social media feed, all over the world, races are coming out. Raid Lowlands, we mentioned Croatia. There's races here coming in America. We have, Expedition Canada is right around the corner. Endless Mountains is coming up again. I mean, we just had Ozark. I mean, there's races just everywhere. So it's good to see that the sport is thriving and the sport is growing. You mentioned ARWS, right? And you have an interesting dynamic going right now because not only do you have to deal with ARWS as an entity, but you're married to the CEO of ARWS, Heidi Muller. Talk to us a bit about that dynamic in terms of coordinating all of that and working alongside her and separating the race itself from the ARWS. How are you managing all of that?
Yeah, look, it's an interesting dynamic, but I mean, me and Heidi has been involved in events racing, since 2000. So 23 years of basically either racing or organizing. And until last year, we've been from 2010 till COVID basically came in 21. We were doing between 10 and 15 event races a year, just the two of us. If it was a small series of weekend races up to 200 kilometers. And I mean, some years we had Expedition India. For 3 years, we had 2 expeditions a year, Expedition India and Africa in the same year. So, it basically, and I mean, that is only a part-time job for me. I still have my full-time medical practice, but it's so part of our lives. I mean, we basically, 24/7 we work, not very healthy,
Right.
But both are in. So the fact that Heidi is now on that side, I think it's just sort of never something that was planned. It's sort of just the way it is. But we have scaled down in the last 2 years. I mean, just from a sacrifice point of view, I mean, we moved the family 1,000 kilometers away from our house. I've been driving, for the last 12 months, been driving once a month down the coast, planning a week, then go back and work again. And she's been here. So I haven't, even my kids, I haven't seen that much. But either, look, it is what it is. But it's not a thing that is sort of just fell in our lap. It is a sort of a lifelong thing that sort of, ended where we are now. So I think we're quite in tune with what the responsibilities are of what we have and what we have to deliver to the market. And I think, I mean, we all know all the other dramas that's playing out in the world with adventure racing, which is very, very unfortunate. But time is, I think time is the thing that will heal. And yeah, this is very unfortunate that it has to be in that we have to run in that space also, because it does. Yeah, that's all I can say about that.
For those at home who are listening, Stephan is referring to the ongoing conversation between Adventure Racing World Series and other organization called A1 with FISO, and there's a national. Will there be national organization Adventure Racing? What kind of covers it? Who governs it? And so you're right. There's this one dynamic where, right, racers just want to race, right? They want to go out on a weekend and know that their race, or 10 days, that their race is well organized and well structured, good race directors working together. And so the average racer really doesn't get involved in all of that. But at the higher levels of the sport right now, there's a lot of conversation going on around the direction of the sport. I myself will share that I remain relatively agnostic towards the entire conversation. I watch and observe, but I am more than comfortable saying that when I see the work that ARWS is doing, spreading the gospel, if you will, of adventure racing and organizing the different series and the media and sharing that, is that someone who's a big fan of the sport, I'm very proud of the work that ARWS has done to bring the sport forward. I have no problem saying that as someone who does his best to be embedded in the sport as possible. And I think it's challenging too, because, and you and I both know this, and any race director out there is going to know this also, is being a race director, and regardless of the size of the race, being a race director is a labor of love in many ways. And it's all consuming, and it's planning a lot. And I don't know many race directors that just direct races. Most race directors I know are people who have jobs outside of the sport. And then in their free time, they love the sport so much and they love the experience so much that they spend their time, their effort, their capital, their resources to bring races to the world, right? And I find that time and time again. I mean, the amount of dedication that so many race directors bring to the sport is just, it's commendable. And it speaks to the quality of the community. But all that other noise, though, I do agree with you. I think unfortunate is a really good word used to describe it. And it's a controversy that I hope that there's a resolution to it sooner rather than later, because I don't think in the long run, it's not good for the sport to have this conflict that's existing between there. So I appreciate you mentioning it. I appreciate you bringing that up, because I think it's good for the listener to know that there are a lot of people that are working really hard on behalf of the sport because they love the sport, right? No one does this because for any other reason than the fact that they have a deep admiration for what adventure racing represents to them. And we talked a lot about that earlier in the podcast, about all of that. As you sit at your perspective right now, and you've done all the races you've done, and you see which way the direction of the sport is going, are there any trends that you're seeing in the sport? You mentioned pack rafting earlier, getting very popular, except it would be eaten alive in Africa. We talked about the live tracking. We talked about the line racing versus the loop racing. As you look in your crystal ball, Stephan, and you see the direction of the sport, what predictions do you have for the way the sport's going to go in the future?
Well, I think the major thing is going to happen. And I mean, obviously I've got a bit of an inside lane, because my wife is not, I can always hear in the background what they're talking about. But although I'm not involved at all in ARWS series, I mean, right. But obviously it's part of the family. I think technology and how do we make it live? I mean, meaning a lot of different things. How do we go from where we are now? I mean, I remember, like I said, when we started a conversation, my first video I saw was a VHS cassette, which you plugged in. You know what I mean? So that's 20 years. So I mean, if I look, especially in America, with all the podcasts and live shows and interactions between people watching the dots, I mean, that I think is the biggest jump that's going to happen. I mean, like a paddle is a paddle, a trek is a trek. These beautiful places, people put, stop, run a circle, get back to their boats. Other people go in a straight line. And that's adventure racing. And obviously the directors are the lifeblood. If you lose it, I mean, obviously the athletes are most important because there will be nothing without them. But after that, the race directors are the people who sort of keeps these things going for whatever reason, motivates me. But I think from a technology point of view and how we can get the media, because one thing I've definitely can see, a little bit I can see from behind the scenes with my wife being a CEO, is that everybody wants to be part of this. That is the most amazing thing that I can see. People will volunteer. I mean, I look at that. I mean, we're so blessed. I mean, I've got, I think 60 or 70 people who volunteered to come 2.5 weeks to South Africa, their own cost, flying in. I give them accommodation. I give them a little bit of allowance for food and stuff. Obviously here we transport them and, but they're coming, they're paying their own flight tickets. They 2.5 weeks of time. I mean, time in these days are so valuable. They are willing to give, and I bet 90% don't even know maybe of us, but they don't know us. They don't owe us anything. So I think everybody wants to be involved. And I'm not talking just from an athlete and the normal variety of people that's involved in adventure racing, but on your media point of view. There's people who just from a camera point of view, from a sound point of view, everybody's got another idea. So I think technology, and especially with our youngsters. I mean, I've got 2 kids, I've got 3 children, and my oldest is 50, but I've got 2 young children of 10 and 8. Technology is the key. If we want to get them into the sport, we have to embrace technology. I mean, even this whole thing about, GPS or not, I know it's the type of a debate we never want to get involved in because, but it's a thing that we have to think about. How much does it really help you? How much? I'm saying technology, and that is why I'm excited about. We have a conference at the World Champs, and it's the only thing which is sad. Again, if we go back to the other stories, the conference is not about ARWS series. It's not about Expedition Africa. It's not about Heidi and Stephan Muller. It's about adventure racing. So if we have an outside company that we have appointed now. We'll make the announcement as soon as the entries on our close, and we can focus on that. We're going to run this conference totally independent of all of us, specifically for that reason, that we want all these people to come. We want people with these brilliant ideas. I know Heidi is speaking to other people, not really adventure racing, but also an endurance market, with their technology and live TV shows. And I think, so long answer, I think technology is going to make this massive jump for our sport and put it into, I can't even say put it in your lounge because that's that old phrase, and put it into your hand because it goes to your cell phone. I think that is where the biggest jump, I think, we're going to make, we will change our sport down.
I think we'll go back to the technology in a second, because I think you're spot on when you say that, but I do want to come back to the volunteers for a second, because it is amazing, as someone who's volunteered at races and been at races with great volunteers, I think people volunteer, people get involved because they recognize that an adventure race, once again, agnostic to the difference, 6 hours, 6 days, 9 days, 10 days, is that people, they want to be a witness to what happens during an adventure race, that they want to see teams out there turning themselves inside out, working hard, challenges, kind of being a bit exposed, learning about like nutrition and taking care of their feet and take care of themselves, and to be a witness to the beginning of the race, to the end of the race, and seeing that tail of the race to go through, and to see what all the stories and the triumphs and the victories and the challenges and sometimes in the defeats and the failures, because teams do fall apart. Volunteers love being a part of that, helping that happen, and they love being a witness to that. We did when we were last year, once again, the Endless Mountains, we were out in Clarion University in Pennsylvania. And I said to the staff of the hotel, of the dormitory where we were staying, this college dormitory, take a good look at these racers. They will look like different people when they come back in 5 days, after the effort and all that goes through there. So I think I'm glad you highlighted the volunteers. And I always like to say this during the podcast, that if this sounds interesting to you, contact your local race director and offer to go man a TA, to go work at a CP or whatever it could be. You see really, really, really cool things. Regarding technology, I think that you're accurate about that. I think as technology gets stronger and stronger, and we're seeing it, the ability to give the at-home viewer the opportunity to follow a race even closer. You could feel the energy coming behind it, whether it be the live tracking, the commentary shows, the daily updates, that it's getting to a point where more and more races are getting virtual, in the sense that people could sit right on top of it at home. I follow a lot of the other sports that do this, and there was a race called Cocodana, 250-mile race out in Western US, and they had a very, very impressive live platform where they got a lot of technology for in the field reporting, like when the racers were running through transition areas, getting a sense of the racers. A lot of race directors now have like 5-minute media timeouts where every team has to talk to the media for 5 minutes to update, to tell the story of the race, to create the narration. So I think you're absolutely right about that. And alongside that, as the GPS and the mapping technology gets better, we're getting a better sense of where everybody is on the course at the same time and what their challenges are. You saw that at Ozark. Ozark did a really nice job with that, following along with that. So I think you're right. I think technology is going to be there. I think the bones of the sport will remain the same, right? 6 disciplines. You're going to bike, you're going to paddle, you're going to trek, you're going to be on ropes, you're going to be in caves. But to your point, the viewer experience is going to get bigger and bigger. So you're absolutely right about that. And I hope that everyone can sort of see that and absorb that. And we encourage all those technology companies out there to think about event racing, because there's a great story to tell. We're coming up in an hour. Stephan, you've been very kind with your time. I don't want to prolong your day. I know it's afternoon at home and it's a Saturday and you have all sorts of family stuff to do. You have young kids. Anything you want to leave us with? Any closing thoughts as you reflect on this conversation, or you think about the upcoming World Championships? What do you really want the listener to take away from this episode?
I think having the opportunity to host a World Championship, especially for us after doing expedition races for over a decade, I think we appreciate the honor. We understand the responsibility we have, and our race philosophy is the full experience. So from your first contact, where you made your online entry, where you booked your air tickets, you arrive at the airport, we have our cultural dancers there, your first interaction with an animal, the staff at the food. I mean, now with the currency, we just yesterday hit a record low. We now nearly 20 rand to $1. The people are going to pick up about 20 kilograms just eating in South Africa. It's so cheap now. It's not great for us, but definitely for the seas traveler. But that whole experience from when you put your foot into our country and when you leave, that whole experience, we take utmost care for every of those elements. There is no one element that's bigger than the element. And if we can deliver on that experience, that people just had whatever they came for a win, they came for, because I look at our accommodation bookings, we have many families coming. We have our accommodation, it's like a sort of a 5-day, 6-day package, 3 days before, 3 days afterwards. And I would say more than 50% of our bookings are for 14 days in the same house. The people are bringing, I think one American team has got 8 extra people on the transfer, just coming along, and they're not volunteering. They basically can come and do something else here. So I think that whole experience, if we can, deliver that experience to each athlete, to make it a race, make it a totally cultural experience of all the new things they can find. The responsibility is huge, and it's not a thing that we take lightly. And we just want to deliver this utmost. We don't organize the best race ever. That's not the words we use. We just want to create this experience and make sure that people, whatever they paid to come to us, that they really can feel it was worth their while. Yeah.
Well, Stephan, congratulations on hosting the first World Championship in Africa. Your organization's reputation precedes itself. We look forward to tracking along the way. The Dark Zone is going to be a presence across the ocean. We can't make it all the way to the race, but we're going to talk a lot about it leading up to it. Stephan, thank you for coming on to the Dark Zone.
Thanks a lot.
Well, there you have it. Stephan Muller, race director for the Adventure Racing World Championship, coming this October to South Africa. Thanks for being here, listener. We really appreciate it. Special thanks to this episode's sponsor, Enabled Tracking. Find them online, enabledtracking.com. Thank you to Mark and Margot and everybody down there for taking good care of us as we watch the dots. Thank you for being a listener. If you like what you hear, go to your streaming platform of choice and rate, click, like, do all that stuff. The algorithm likes that. Spread the word. And if you remember, If you keep racing, we'll keep talking. Be safe out there.